Go on to Councillor Moore, and then we'll open up the discussion. We've got all the officers here.
And I can't take up.
Not initially. We'll go on to Councillor Moore first. Councillor Moore, if you'd like to present your call.
Can't you finish this part first? It's ridiculous.
We saw what was coming. That's why you told Mrs. Salinger.
I have to
You're
say
not
it's a slightly peculiar way of dealing with calling. However, and I think my concerns are well documented, but I will reiterate them here and allow us to ask additional questions later. There are some real issues of concern about this whole process, the outsourcing in a broader sense, but particularly here about the NS-CSO contract and project. There are some real concerns about consultation. There is a contention that this is not a change in the way services are delivered, but actually is a fundamental change in the way service structure of the council. By your own admission, it's turning you into a commissioning council, commissioning model. And that's a huge change to the way services are both presented and delivered in the council. And I strongly believe that there's been a lack of consultation with local people, and I certainly think many local people would say the same. I'm on record on a number of cases talking about there being a limited robustness in the business case. And I take that back to the beginning in terms of the proper comparison with in-house options, because we really don't know whether this represents best value when it comes to that comparison. We don't know whether we could have made significant improvements in-house. There's been a lot of talk about investment. Councillor Rams, I just want to point out that the money that's being invested by Capital is not free money. You're paying for it during the lifetime of the contract. And so I think there's some real questions. It wasn't an even playing field at the outset. I know that's a long time back, but actually I think you still need to bear that in mind. The issue about democratic accountability and control is a very significant one. The 10-year contract really does give us a challenge in terms of the ability to exit that without financial penalty, even actually if there are service failures as part of that. I am very concerned about the issues around commercial sensitivity, because much in this contract, and having been through much of the bid document and what will become the contract, clearly a lot hangs at proof of the pudding, in a sense, in terms of delivery. And a lot of that hangs on both financial and service and performance KPIs. Some of those are likely to remain commercially sensitive, and I have real concerns about how we will be able to challenge and measure that as a broad range of councillors as we proceed through. And I would be happy to be enlightened on that, but it seems to me that we still have some concerns, particularly during the early part of the contract, about commercial sensitivity in that sense. So I'm very concerned about how we scrutinise that and how we really challenge it. I think there are some real concerns about the guarantees over savings, and I'll come back to that in a minute in a bit more detail. And I think there are genuinely, there's no guarantee that the risks have been mitigated in the contract. And they won't end up potentially costing Barnet Council taxpayers more if there are genuinely problems. And I make those comments in the light of, and you provided very helpfully before the meeting, a set of notes around those councils you had looked at and taken evidence from, certainly in desktop exercises and some visits. And they listed a number of councils that had suffered, where actually they drew back from the contract. They didn't let the latest contract, and there are other authorities who draw back in that sense. They felt that the risks were too big and actually the challenges were too great. There are other councils that have let contracts and then had problems with them and had to come out of contracts or significantly renegotiate them. And so there are costs inherent in doing that. And I take your comment about changes in call on services, don't dispute that, but there are some real concerns about what we might, the penalties we might have if we're having to negotiate our way out of elements of the contract. And finally, in terms of the risks, I would draw your attention, and I'm sure you've looked at this yourself, but there have been recent cases where there are, you've talked about the parent company guarantee, but there is a recent case where there have been problems in a contract. It's one that involved a company called CF Arch Crew Fund. But the point about that was that the parent company had underwritten, but actually the FSA determined that it couldn't bear the cost of both halves of the repayment and actually ceded one of the parts. What it tells me is that there are some concerns in particular circumstances about the ability of the parent company actually to honour that parent company guarantee. And I'd just like your comments on that, because I think that's a potentially serious concern. We are talking about a big contract here, hundreds of millions of pounds, and I am just concerned about making sure. So I hope we don't need to go, and it's a general question, so it's not that I think we need to deal with this part, it's about confidence. So there are those issues there. I think I'd probably leave the rest of the comments to questions during the meeting, but it's very much around that set of consultation, the robust business case, democratic accountability, the transparency and the challenges that that commercial sensitivity gives us in keeping track of the contract if and when it's let, and the issue around guarantees on savings and on risks. Because I think there's still a lot of unanswered questions for the generality of councils here.
Through you, Chairman, if I may, I'd like to hand over to officers to talk about the consultation side of things.
Excuse me, Chair, as a point of order, this is a ridiculous procedure. I'm very sorry, it's a ridiculous procedure that you have one proposal from one councillor and then you don't allow any answers to that.
Excuse me, sir.
I'm sorry, it's a ridiculous procedure that you're in. You can't get to a conclusion.
Excuse me. Firstly, Councillor McGirt, please. Firstly, Mr. Sloan, you are not a member of the committee. You are no longer a member of the council. Please, you are a member of the public. The public are here to listen to the deliberations of the committee, the officers and the councillors.
I'm not criticising the council.
Thank you very much.
I'm criticising the procedure that you are adopting.
Thank you very much indeed.
Chairman, just could I just ask a procedural point, if I may?
Yes,
Councillor Moore just made her presentation. There's going to be some answers now to that presentation. Within the procedure, could we, each of us, then come back?
Yes, of course.
At that stage.
Councillor Rams, could you deal with this yourself initially as a cabinet member? Who are you handing over to? Thank you very much.
Councillor Moore, thank you for the consultation. The Council has adhered to all its statutory obligations with regard to consultation. In addition to that, it's also adhered to its democratic requirements with regard to its own constitutional requirements and procedures. In addition, officers and indeed myself have been available to council to ask questions with regard to the contract at transparency, and we've had sessions which we have discussed elements of the contract, whether they relate to legal, financial and technical elements, in order to give assurance to the councillors with regard to the content of the contract. In addition, we've had one-on-one sessions where they have been requested to go through elements of the contract, and I have met with councillors either at the council offices or our own offices, indeed to go through those requirements. So to answer that element of the issues that you've raised, I think the councillors would like to respond with the other features, but I know that is a specific issue which I hope I've addressed there.
Before that happens, thank you for that, and I appreciate the very